My name is Arlene. The Christmas dinner that just passed felt like a storm that uprooted the false tranquility of my family. It was a night when lies were exposed, and the truth, sharp and unyielding, cut through the air like a blade. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, his face warm with the holiday spirit as he raised his glass. To family, he said, his voice full of love and expectation. But as he continued, "Do you like the house I bought you?" The world around me seemed to stop. Forks froze in mid-air, and all eyes turned to me. I was utterly confused. What house? My mother's hand slipped from her wine glass, the red wine spilling across the tablecloth like a mark of impending doom. Her face paled, and Grandpa's smile disappeared in an instant. He pushed back his chair, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. "Show me the deed now," he demanded. It was in that moment that I knew everything I thought I'd known about my family was a lie. But this dinner had been a long time coming, a ticking time bomb set off by the discovery I'd made weeks ago. I lived in a small, cramped apartment in Seattle. It was a place where the old heater rattled so loudly that it drowned out my thoughts. Every month, I struggled to pay the rent and the overdue bills, often relying on instant noodles for dinner. Meanwhile, my parents, Carl and Vera Thompson, flaunted their wealth on social media. They'd post pictures of their luxurious vacations in the Alps and their brand new fancy cars, followed by lectures about how independence built character. Mom's texts would start sweetly, "Dear Arlene, hope you're well," but end with a sting. "You should really learn to manage your money like a responsible adult." I never replied. Silence was the only shield I had against their constant jabs. Grandpa, Henry Thompson, was different. He was a man of integrity, discipline, and quiet power. When I was 25, he sat me down and said, "Someday, I'll make sure you have a place to call your own." At the time, I thought it was just his way of encouraging me. After all, he was a planner, not one for wild surprises. A week before Christmas, he called me. There was an odd excitement in his voice. "This year, I have a special gift for you, Arlene," he said. I laughed it off, telling him he didn't have to get me anything. But he chuckled and said, "Oh, it's already done." That night, as I scrolled through my phone, looking at my parents' pictures of their high-end dinner in Miami, all captioned, "Family is everything," it felt like a cruel joke. I met my friend Lily at our usual coffee shop. We sat there pretending to work on our laptops. When I told her about Grandpa's call, she smirked. "Special gift, huh? Maybe he finally realized you deserve more than their leftovers." I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes and said, "Or maybe it's another lecture." Outside, the Christmas lights twinkled against the cold rain, and inside, my coffee grew cold. Little did I know that the gift Grandpa spoke of was a Pandora's box that would expose the dark secrets of my family. A few days later, while searching for a client's invoice on my laptop, an unfamiliar email popped up. The subject line read, "Congratulations on the successful sale of the Cedar Lane property." At first, I thought it was spam. But then I saw the address, Cedar Lane. My heart skipped a beat. Grandpa had mentioned this street years ago, saying it was a place that would be perfect for me. I stared at the email, my throat tightening. Sold. But sold to who? I called Mom, trying to sound calm. "Hey, random question. Did Grandpa ever buy a house on Cedar Lane?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Then she said in an airy tone, "Oh, that. The market crashed that year, remember? Nothing ever came of it," I said slowly, "because I got this weird email." Her breath hitched and she snapped, "Arlene, you shouldn't open things that aren't yours. You always overthink." And with that, she hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise in my apartment seemed to whisper, they lied. I traced the email back to a realtor's office in Bellevue. The next morning, I called pretending to be a buyer interested in recent sales. The agent confirmed that the house had been sold 5 years ago under the name Carl Thompson. I felt a cold numbness wash over me. My parents had sold a house that was meant for me and had never told me. When Grandpa called to confirm Christmas dinner, I almost spilled the beans. But I couldn't bear to break his heart. So I said, "Of course I'll be there. I'll bring a pie." After hanging up, I looked out the window at the falling snow. Lily texted me, asking if I was okay. I typed back, "I think my parents stole something that was mine." She replied, "Make them give it back." I didn't answer. Instead, I whispered to myself, "Okay then, Christmas dinner it is." 3 days before Christmas, I drove through the freezing rain to Grandpa's office. His assistant, Grace, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a hint of hesitation or maybe guilt in her expression. I said casually, trying to hide my trembling fingers, "I just wanted to drop off his gift early." She lowered her voice and said, "Mr. Thompson thought you'd already moved in." I was confused. Moved in where? She reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "He's so proud that you finally have your own place on Cedar Lane," she said. I repeated, "Cedar Lane?" She nodded and whispered, "He bought it 3 years ago in your name. He said your parents took care of the paperwork." I felt the ground beneath me shift. I asked to see the papers, and she reluctantly handed me a photocopy of the original deed. There, in bold letters, was my name, and stapled behind it was the sale agreement, signed by Carl Thompson. I sat in my car, the cold seeping in like a punishment. I gripped the papers until they were wrinkled. I wanted to scream, but all I could hear was the ticking of the turn signal I'd forgotten to turn off. That night, I called Lily. "They sold it," I said flatly. "They took what was mine and told him I had it." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "So, what are you going to do?" I replied, "I'm going to dinner." The next morning, I met with Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Harris. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to make him frown. "You'll be at the Christmas dinner, right?" I asked. He studied me and said, "Do you want me to protect your grandfather or expose your parents?" I said, "Both in that order." As I left his office, the rain had turned to snow. Seattle was covered in a white blanket, looking clean and pure on the surface, but I knew the truth beneath. On Christmas night, the Thompson family gathered around the table. The chandelier sparkled, and the fireplace crackled, but there was an underlying tension in the air. I sat across from my parents, listening to their stories about their latest business deals and vacations. Every word they said grated on my nerves. Grandpa, the only one with a genuine smile, raised his glass and the nightmare unfolded as I described earlier. Dad tried to defend himself, his voice trembling. "Dad, this isn't the right time." Grandpa cut him off, his voice cold and sharp. "I trusted you to take care of that property for Arlene." Mom's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Henry, please. We only." But Grandpa stared her down and said, "Vera, don't lie to me." Just then, Grace appeared from the side door and handed Grandpa a brown envelope. He called Mr. Harris, who entered the room with his briefcase. Mr. Harris opened the briefcase and spread the documents on the table. My parents' faces turned ashen. Mr. Harris pointed to the first page. "This is the original purchase deed, in Arlene's name, signed and notarized." He flipped to the next page. "And this shows that it was sold 3 months later by Carl Thompson. The transfer of funds is confirmed here." Grandpa's hand shook as he traced the signatures. "You sold her house," he whispered. Dad swallowed hard and said, "We were just managing it. She wasn't ready." I snapped, my anger finally boiling over. Ready for what? To have something of my own? To stop depending on you. Mom reached out to me, saying, "Honey, we did it for you. You were struggling." I pulled my hand away. "No. You thought you could hide it." The air in the room was thick with tension. Grandpa stood up slowly, his chair scraping the floor. "From this day forward, you don't speak for her again," he said firmly. Mom started to cry, mascara running down her face. "Henry, we didn't mean to hurt her." But Grandpa replied quietly, "But you did. And you did it right in front of me." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. A silver key slid into his palm. He looked at me and said, "It was meant to be yours, Arlene. It still is." He placed the key in front of me. At first, I couldn't move. My throat was tight with a mix of relief and grief. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair falling over. "We're your family," he shouted. You can't cut us out over a misunderstanding. Grandpa's eyes hardened. You're right. You're family, but not the kind I want in my life. There was a deafening silence. Mom's voice broke as she pleaded. Arlene, please. Tell him we can fix this. I looked up, my eyes steady. You can't fix something you sold, mister. Harris gathered the papers and said, We'll start the reversal proceedings in the morning. Grandpa exhaled deeply and said softly, Merry Christmas, Arlene. He placed his hand on my shoulder, the same hand that had taught me how to tie my shoelaces when I was a child. You've always had a strong sense of right and wrong, he murmured. Mom covered her face, and Dad turned away. Their excuses no longer mattered. I stood up, the key cold in my palm, and looked around the room. The tree lights flickered, and the air smelled of pine and betrayal. I'd imagined that revenge would feel like a wildfire, but it was a quiet calm. It was like the end of a long, sad chapter. When I stepped outside, the cold night air stung my cheeks. The snow was falling again, softly covering the porch railing. Through the window, I could see Grandpa standing tall, a symbol of truth and integrity. Inside, my parents sat small and defeated, trapped in their web of lies. I whispered to myself, they wanted me to earn my life. I just did. And with that, I walked into the snow, free, cold, and finally awake. The next morning, the house was quiet. Mom and Dad's car was gone by sunrise, leaving only twin tire tracks in the snow. They didn't say goodbye. Grandpa found me in the sunroom, sitting with a cold cup of coffee. His movements were slower than usual, a sign of the deep disappointment he felt. He said softly, I trusted them too much. I thought money and family bonds could keep us honest. I looked up at him and said, You believed the best in them. That's not a mistake. He shook his head. You reminded me what honesty really looks like. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table. Inside were fresh papers, with my name clearly printed at the top, the title deed to the house on Cedar Lane. I had Mr. Harris redo everything last night. It's official. The house is yours, and their actions will be dealt with separately, he said. My throat tightened. Grandpa, I'm not even sure if I want it anymore. He smiled, a tired but warm smile. You don't have to move in right away. Just know that it's there for you, just like I'll always be here when you need me. Later that week, news spread through Seattle's business circles that Carl and Vera Thompson had been removed from several boards. The Thompson family reputation, once shiny, now had a crack in it. But no one outside knew the real story. I met Lily at the coffee shop again. I told her, I don't feel like I've won. I just feel like I've stopped losing myself. She nodded and said, That's what real victory looks like. A week later, I drove to Cedar Lane. The street was quiet, lined with snow, covered evergreen trees. The house stood there, with white walls and large windows, its front porch inviting me like an open embrace. I stepped out of the car, the air crisp and clean. I held the silver key up to the morning light. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a disappointment or a burden. I felt like just me. I turned the key in the lock and whispered, Home. Justice may not always be loud, but it always stands up in the end.